There is some interest in the role of antioxidants found in coffee and a reduced risk of diabetes. Does your work support such a link?
That's an interesting question. I'd say possibly it does. It may be that in some cases antioxidant compounds or compounds that have antioxidant activity might play a role, but it might not just be the antioxidant activity of the compound itself. It may actually be another mechanism that's separate from the antioxidant activity.
Do you have any suggestions for why antioxidants might or might not play a role in diabetes prevention?
I think what's interesting to think about with antioxidants is that, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily the antioxidant activity of the molecule, but some molecules that do have antioxidant activity may interact with some specific cellular pathways that might have a different type of effect of coffee and risk reduction for diabetes.
What do you think about caffeine, as evidence to date suggests it probably does not play a role?
Caffeine's a tricky one. I think some short-term studies have shown that caffeine may acutely disrupt glucose tolerance, and so that I think has gotten a little bit of press. But really that's happened only at very large doses of caffeine, and there's limited data on longer-term exposure to caffeine over time and what those effects might entail.
What are the current mechanistic theories on how coffee might act with regards to diabetes?
Well, that was really kind of the goal of my summary of the mechanisms, and that is that, if you go back to caffeine, caffeine actually may be one of the things that over the long term might have some impact, because some studies have shown that caffeine might increase energy expenditure, but again, some of those studies were done with very high doses, so it's kind of difficult to tell. Other components of coffee might actually have other physiologic effects. For example, they may change the way your body handles carbohydrate or sugars during digestion, or alternatively even change the way that your body responds to insulin. And finally, it may be a combination of different mechanisms and different bioactive components in coffee that may actually lead to some protective effect. But more research is required to find that out.
What are the key findings from this research?
Really my talk was just an overview of all of the different mechanisms, and my goal really was just to kind of get folks in the audience to really think about, what might be driving this strong association between coffee and the risk reduction for type 2 diabetes. I think, a lot more research obviously is required, especially clinical research, to try to understand that. So that's really, the goal of what my summary was about.
What are the implications of these findings on diabetes prevention?
I think the bottom line is that right now we see a strong association between coffee consumption and the reduction in risk of type 2 diabetes, but that's what it is right now. It's not a cause and effect relationship. So I think that future and further investigation into the different possible mechanisms, especially in a clinical context, will help us better understand this, and I think that should be the goal of future research in this area.